An essayist, a poet, and a novelist. She passed on June 30th, aged 81 years of age, and has been celebrated as a trailblazer whose revolutionary spirit will indeed continue living. So we just want to have a discussion on some of the notable literary work she did, including the revolutionary aspect of her long and truly important life. I'm joined by two esteemed guests. Allow me to introduce them before we get their take right now. First of all, Rachel Mwikali, asante sana for your time. She's the coordinator of Grassroots Women Human Rights Defenders. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Karibu. Asante. Equally joined by Dr. Wanjohi Makoha, who is a literary scholar and lecturer at Kenyatta University. Daktari, asante for your time. Karibu.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're definitely remembering the life and times of the late Professor Micere Mugo, and I'm pretty sure each of you remember her differently. So we want to bring life to her story. Who exactly was she, Rachel Mwikali? How do you remember her in terms of what she stood for, and how best would you remember the late Professor Mugo?
First, I'd like to say thank you for having us and having the space to honor our heroes, and that's including Professor Micere and our friend also, Ama Atadu. But I remember Micere being also that last year we honored her and awarded her as being a part of the Human Rights Award Defenders Judging Panel. Mm-hmm. And for me to remember her is during the lecture that she gave us about especially revolution, what it means, and that in the current state and even now what we are seeing in Kenya, where when you speak out, whether you're an activist or you're a journalist, an academician who speak truth to power, we are seeing the civic space shrinking. Mm-hmm. But she was very vocal in inspiring most of us that we should not give up and we should not allow the word revolution being dirtified, but we should reclaim it and ensure that we continue speaking. And she was very vocal about freedom of expression in speech, which we know clearly also journalists, you have been under attack with the current regime. She was very clear about feminism and feminist politics and what it means being also a Pan-African in terms of Utu and Ubuntu and being together. But at the same time, seeing her in a moment, and for me it's really painful that we lost her, and I know many human rights defenders in the sector, because currently also as the sector, we are planning to have different commemoration to ensure like young people like myself are able to know our important work in continuing the struggle for independence, how it was, and when also she had to leave the country, but also the situation where we are currently, what it means even her being a woman revolutionary, and the kind of also attack and threat she got. Okay. But still she remained vocal within the space to continue fighting for democracy and revolution.
Well, that's definitely encompasses a lot in terms of her work and her career as well. Dr. Makoha, how best would you remember the late professor?
Yeah, thank you for having us, Jesse. Again, as Mwikali has said, we are deeply grateful for this opportunity to memorialize one of the really phenomenal Kenyans whom we have had the luck to live with in the same lifetime. Professor Micere wore different hats, and she wore many hats all at once. I remember first coming into contact with her as a student of literature at the university myself. And I remember the teachers who taught us at Kenyatta University laid emphasis on the place of women writers in Africa's post-coloniality. Okay. And her name kept coming up as one of the figureheads of African literature since the 1960s. She was a trailblazer in many ways. Take note that she was one of the first black girls to join a high school after the laws against segregations were removed, and that is way back in the 1960s. From there, she proceeded to Alliance Girls, and then after Alliance Girls, where she was again one of the pioneers, females from Kenya getting education, she went to Micere. And she went to Micere when it still had that, powerful figure and a powerful light on the continent. It was the beacon of higher education in our region at a time when there were no other universities to compete with it. So she went there with, in the 1960s. In the 1970s, she would come back to Kenya, and she would be hired as a lecturer. Again, one of the first females to teach literature at the university here in Kenya, at a time when the University of Nairobi was the only university in this country. And at that particular point, she started growing her literary oeuvre, first by producing collaborations with major writers like Ngugi wa Thiong'o in a play like the one that has been translated into Kiswahili as well as Mzalendo Kimathi. Exactly, The Trial of Dedan Kimathi in English. But prior to that, she had written another radio play called The Long Illness of Chief Kitty, which was part of her requirements to fulfill her degree in Masters of Arts at the University of New Brunswick in Canada. So from that particular flowering, you are able to see that she was not just a trailblazer in terms of acquisition of education in our country at a time when we were in transition, but she was also a person who was multi-talented in terms of craft.
Okay, and that encompasses her life, especially in terms of her literary works. But before we cross over to her, I just want to get a feeling of how weighty her literary works were. In terms of that play that was titled The Trial of Dedan Kimathi, that is said to have riled the Moi administration back then, what role did she play, and how would you define Mugo's literary and activism philosophy?
Great. Let me start by saying that Muikali has mentioned an award that she was given in the country just last year.
Yes.
11 years ago, she had been given another award by the University of Dar es Salaam. And this award was actually to install her as the Julius Kambarage Nyerere Distinguished Lecturer, an honorary title by that university given to people who have made splendid contributions to our discourses of Africanism and Pan-Africanism. And this particular award was awarded to Micere at a time when the Tanzanians could have given it to any other person, but they had identified a very clear and consistent message of African dignity and what she preferred to call as Utu, or what the South Africans call Ubuntu, the philosophy that I am because you are and you are because I am, the collective humanness of humanity. This is one of the issues that was stridently and consistently with Micere ever since she started teaching at the University of Nairobi. And when you look at that particular play that you say or you talk about, you are able to see that one of the things that she was trying to do with the play was not just to entertain, but to raise collective consciousness, to raise awareness of our people at a time when the politics of the country were taking a direction that was not very palatable. And what I might say also is that why theater? Why is it that her poetry, which she had written also, was not considered to be quite, anti-government or political? It's because theater in itself as a genre is susceptible to public engagement. It is an art form that is in contact with the people. It is an art that is meant to be showcased rather than to be read. And there is a way in which then theater as a medium can reach so many people and act as an agent of collective consciousness and heightening of people's vision about society in a way that other genres could not do. So the moment she took that direction with Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and much later, of course, Ngugi would work with Ngugi wa Micere to also produce the other play, Ngai Kandeda, or I Will Marry When I Want. When you look at all these plays being produced around that particular point, a transition between a transition from Kenyatta to Moi and the politics that went with that transition, you're able to see that Micere was right in the middle of a moment like no other in our history.
Definitely. So Mwikali, as you come in, I'd like us to understand the role she played in terms of, championing the role of women in terms of activism, not just in the country, but in the region as well. And equally, in terms of intergenerational activism, because you mentioned one of the Ghanaian playwright, author, and activist who just died recently, the late Ama Ato Aido. what's the role of women in such struggles, and how can it be passed from generation to generation so we do not, we pass the torch, we don't let this this work actually end with the passing on of the professor?
And thank you for raising that question. And as an activist also who lives in an area where there's a lot of inequality, that's Mathare, and seeing also being a woman human rights defender who is also a Pan-Africanist in this space where also there is patriarchy, and seeing both of them, Prof. Micere and Ama Atadu, the role they played in terms of also calling out colonialism, in terms of the kind of resource that was taken away from us, calling out patriarchy that works against women and girls within the community, calling out oppression of communities and the class issue. You could see in one of the Micere also point of view, and also Ama Atadu, on around dignity, what it means when someone takes away your dignity, and that we should not let people take our dignity. But for both of them, why are they instrumental, not only just to the women movement or to the feminist movement, but to the continent, is because they were able to speak out in a time that many people are not speaking out. They were able to use their creativity and activism, I'll call it activism, because art speaks to the heart, to educate the public. And some of the poems that both of them were writing, you could see it resonate with the kind of politics we're experiencing today. And also I like the part also they were using also humor in terms of the African dance, like what it means. And in many cases you'd hear there's no revolution without music or dance, and the kind of politics around poetry that it plays within the country. But one of the significant roles that we must celebrate, both of them, the fact that they are Ghanaian and the other one is Kenyan, is the spirit that they have put into us. I remember last year when we were giving her the award, at first I didn't know a lot about Professor. I knew her because of the work that we were doing, but meeting her in person and reading was totally different. It made me feel as a young woman, as a young black woman, whatever I've been doing in this country is not taken for granted, and that they opened the way for all of us. And this is also an encouragement to the most of how we call the G and Z, or people in my generation, that and especially the young women, that whatever they did, we can still continue pushing. The kind of rights we enjoy today, even especially on a round of expression and the Pan-African politics and the role of women, is that we should continue. And one thing I can say, both Professor Micere and Ama Atadu, they have not died, they have multiplied. And they have multiplied in such a way that it's up to us now to continue the liberation work that they have left, but also to encourage many of also my young people in my generation to read about their work. Because we have realized a lot of women history, also for both of them, has been erased within the space in the liberation struggle. It's also time to reclaim back that also the way also some of their work that was documented by comrades and colleagues, we can still use it to educate our younger children, our younger generation, but at the same time inviting the public, including also the media fraternity, and the public at Kenya, that we should learn on and also Africa, celebrating our own prophets. And our own prophets were late Professor Micere, our own prophets were Professor Ama Atadu, and also there are series of also activities that are being planned. The one on the Taifa Hall that will be happening next month. We encourage Kenyans to come and learn more about our work. We have also another activity that will be planned at Kenya National Theatre and different grassroots communities, where we are going to put their work into place in terms of us learning and moving the liberation struggle forward. Because currently we are seeing a lot of rights and shrinking space going low. We are seeing the right of protest going low because of people we are claiming about our rights, but it's being shrunk. And some of these women were very clear that we should not give up about our identity and liberation struggle. And it's the time also to ensure the liberation struggle, especially for women, is never seen as a problematic issue, but is seen as a point of big role within our African continent.
Oh, thank you for illustrating that. And Dr. Ari, as we finalize, and this is quite unfortunate at times in terms of the revolutionary work. You're celebrated more away from home than at home. So for those of us who are in Kenya who had the opportunity to live in the same lifetime with the great professor, how best can we celebrate her life from where you sit, and why exactly is it important to celebrate her life? Briefly.
Thank you again, Jesse. As Muikali has pointed out, we have a panel within the country that is using social media and virtual communication across the disparate places where they are located across the country to actually plan a series of events to celebrate Mama, at least in this time of a funerary moment. And as she said, there's a big full-day celebration that is coming up at the University of Nairobi, which was actually her home intellectually when she was still here in Kenya. And we also have a number of other activities. For example, tomorrow at night, we'll have a readathon or a reading marathon from 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock, which is organized by Kenyatta University.
In the PM
yes,
or in the AM?
In the PM.
Okay.
In the PM.
Yeah.
Kenyatta University, the Creative Writers Association of Kenya, which also has a lot of young members in there, and the Kenya Literature Association, which also has a lot of young intellectuals who are from the Generation Z, and also those who are born in the millennials. So I want to say that Micere was many things at one. And for me, I want to remember her as a teacher. Just this morning before I came here, I had a cup of tea with a professor who is around 72 years of age and who was her direct student 40 years ago. And he remembers Micere as somebody who was very active as a teacher, but also very friendly. She had an open door policy as a teacher, that students who are teaching, who she's teaching, are not just a student, but also people learning from her. So she took that particular mantle of a teacher in the context of mentorship. And she used to carry Professor Locho Bura, for example, from KU, Professor Peter Amuka from Moi University, back then as young students in their early 20s. She would take them around in her own Datsun to different places. She would take them to Alliance, she would take them to Loreto Convent when she's invited to go and give talks. And why was she doing this? Because she wanted them to see the world from her perspective, that when you have knowledge, it's not something that you keep as a kind of controlled capital, but it's something that you extend to the rest of the world. The same philosophy of Ubuntu and humanism still informing her to reach out to members of society. So I would just want to say that younger people, especially in the academy, should borrow a leaf from her. That teaching is not just a job that earns your salary. It's not a job whose performance contract forms you sign these days, but it is a platform that society has given you so that you can have impact both within and outside the areas of knowledge. And this is the best thing that I think younger scholars, younger teachers should carry from old Mwalimu Micere, even as she signs off.
Well said. And this coming from a lecturer as well, it definitely shows she was a trailblazer in every right. Final words, 30 seconds or so, Mwikali.
For me, it's as Africans, as Kenyans, let's learn to celebrate our own heroes and our own heroes. Let us not see heroes being from a politician's point of view. And long live the spirit of Mama Micere, long live the spirit of Mama Ata Aitu.
Asanteni sana for your time, and definitely this is just a tip of the iceberg. We can't summarize all her work in just 20 minutes, so we definitely appreciate your time and highlighting how exactly she stood out.